The question people always ask is, why did you stay so long? But that question misses the point. Most people don't stay because they're stupid. They stay because leaving feels harder than suffering. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's loyalty. Sometimes it's children. Sometimes it's money. And sometimes it's just fear. So today's conversation is all around the decision to sometimes whether you're in relationships because of love or whether you're in relationships because of the fear of leaving. People don't stay in relationships because they're weak. People stay because they're attached to the life that they've helped create, to create the life that they dreamed of, that they hoped it would be, that they put the 5, the 10, the 15, the 20 years into building. So it's not just about the person that they're in the relationship with, it's about the life that they've sometimes created together. And that could be so many aspects to it. It could be a house. Sometimes we've created a home and a house together that has taken sort of blood, sweat, tears, money, working on it yourself, that you've created a home that you now want to stay and enjoy. And that will disappear if your relationship doesn't continue. So that's one of the driving forces sometimes, or just one of them, that people think outside of the relationship. It's all the bolt-ons that you think about: house, your routine, finance, identity, shared history together, and fear of wasted years. And probably the most important one is obviously children. Now, the house, as we've already said, is something that, you build a home, and it's four walls that you can fall in love with, and you've put your heart and soul into it. And that sometimes a house holds memories for you that you don't want to leave. Like we said, sometimes it's the routine. It's something that has given you a purpose, especially if you're a stay-at-home parent. Your purpose, your role is creating that home. It's looking after the kids. It's making sure that they've got everything ready for the next day. That's your role in your partnership together. While one of you may have decided, right, you're going to take care of the children, you're going to take care of the home, you're going to take care of the routine. I'm going to go out every day and I'm going to be earning the money. So I'm going to go and do that. So it may be the fear that, what would be your purpose? How would your routine look after that? Because, you're already set with it. You've put in the hard yards. You've done the first 3 or 4 years when it's really hard with the kids. And now you're getting to a stage like any job where, okay, I've got my routine now. I know the shortcuts I can make. I know when I get some little time to myself. And maybe it is that you get to go and get out to the gym, or go and have lunch with friends, or coffee with friends. And your other partner might say, well, it's okay for you, I'm working, and you're out having coffee and having lunches. Now, we all know that when you're working, you do exactly the same as well. We know enough people that work from working places where they can nip off, they're playing golf, they're doing this, and that necessarily divided between men and women whatsoever, because roles do change now. But it's the same thing. You learn in whatever job that you do to make it easy work rather than hard work. You tend to work smarter than always, harder sometimes. So that routine becomes very important. Finances become so intertwined, and especially if you're in relationships where you've got a central pot and everything goes into there, it's like, how do you divide everything up? And if you are the person that has been the stay-at-home parent, your role doesn't necessarily have any monetary value. The other person going out to work might earn X amount a year. So you know their job is worth X amount a year that they're earning. No one puts a price upon the stay-at-home parent that, well, if you're staying at home parent, you're earning X amount a year. To me, I like the idea of that if you're in a partnership with someone, that's exactly what it is. It's a partnership. If one of them is going out and earning the money and the other is doing all the other work, then it's 50-50. It should be, split evenly. I know lots of people don't see it that way, but to me, if you enter into a partnership, it's a partnership. Or you don't enter into a partnership in the beginning. You just decide, right, you're going to have your job, but I'm not staying at home. I'm going to have my job. And then, we'll both put X amount in the pot together. And that's for the kids, the nursery, whoever we get to look after the kids. So you both retain independence. And I think maybe that's happening more now in relationships because couples realize that they both want their life and they both need to work. Living is expensive now. Also, it's about identity. It's about you're with someone. That's my husband. That's my wife. Aren't you married to him? Aren't you married to her? And so your identity, if you decide to leave, completely changes. You become like the single one. You become like the single parent or the one who hasn't got a plus one at parties, or you become that person that they're not with their partner anymore. So you have to endure all of that, and that changes your identity for you because you've been the person that looks after the kids or the person that goes out to work. That's quite a fear in itself of it's starting again and it's completely unknown. You also have shared history, obviously. If you've grown up together, you've spent your 20s together, that traveling together, the getting the first house, and everything is so intertwined with each other that you can't see how you would unpick that. You can't see how that would look. The fear of the wasted years that you've put into this history, into this other person, and to a large degree, you may have lost yourself and not even know what you look like anymore as being on your own because you've not had time to think about you because you've been so busy doing the job that you're doing. You always hear those lines like, I used to be really funny or I used to be really fun. Now I go out to work, I come home and I'm just tired. I sit down, I don't do anything. So sometimes it's that shared history and that identity combined with the fear of wasting all those years that you've put into something that will cease to exist, and you don't know what the next stage looks like. So it's that fear of the unknown, the fear of not knowing what it looks like, and probably listening to podcasts and clips and socials about people talking about midlife dating like myself and saying, it's hard. It's really hard. And thinking, well, I don't want to be doing that. I do not want to be doing that. So that fear can be enough to make you stay where you are. It's like you're on the edge of a cliff and thinking, that looks a long way down there. I don't know if I want to do that. And then, of course, it's about friends and family that you've made together. You might get on now really well with the other person's family, your partner's family, and think, well, I don't want to lose them. I don't want to not be involved in their lives anymore. And I know them and I know their children. And what will that look like? And, also, our friends that we've made together, will they see me as the villain? Will they not choose me? Will they decide they're not going to speak to me? Will they favour the other person? And, will their loyalties be with them? And, what will that then look like for me? Will I not have any friends? So all these questions that you may have will will be like sort of bars in a prison that will keep you where you are sometimes, because you're not just leaving a person, you're leaving the future that you thought you were building together. And that's hard to do. It's hard to invest that amount of time into something that you feel at the moment could just be wasted. So being comfortable can actually feel like love. And sometimes people mistake familiarity for love. They mistake that routine that they've got for a life. They think that they're happy when, if they sat down and thought, right, I'm going to write down on a piece of paper what makes me happy. And that's a very interesting exercise sometimes, to actually think about what makes me happy. You know, what actually makes me happy, not the role that you have, not the routine that you do, what actually does make you happy. So then the routine can become emotionally dependent for you, because you equate it with, that's my identity, that's my job, that's what I do. So that becomes you instead of you being yourself, and that just becomes something that you do, like our job. You know, our jobs don't define us, we define us. What we do doesn't define us. Most of us, some of us are very lucky to love our jobs. Some of us are just going to out the door every day to do this because we need money to pay for things. Simple as that. You know, mortgages, food, everything that we need. In order to have a life and live a life, you need to get money. And, you know, in this society, that's what we go to work for in the first place. We go to work to get money so that we can live that life. And if you can enjoy what you do, then you're extremely lucky. And the biggest drive sometimes is that keeps you in relationships is the fear of loneliness, especially if you're someone that is relationship dependent, that lots of people are. And that's just a trait. They function within a couple. They find it very difficult to just be on their own, to spend time in their own head, you know, without anyone else there. And that could be something that we forget to do, because we've always, since growing up, surrounded ourselves with people, because we want to communicate. We want to have shared experiences. We want people to make us laugh. We like the feeling of making other people laugh. And humans are social creatures, so we need that social connection. And sometimes it is that fear of, you know, will it just be me? Will I just be on my own? So all of these things can bond us, and it could be through trauma as well that we've bonded. Trauma bonds where we've had shared experiences that have brought us closer to people, and we have all these memories that we feel that we've got a debt to someone because we've shared all these years. So, you know, if I walk away, I don't want to see that person hurt. You know, I love them. I'm not in love with them, but I love them. So I want them to be fine. And so we end up staying because that's what we know. We end up staying because of the familiarity. We end up staying because of the comfort. We end up staying because we don't want to be the bad guy. Some people just aren't in love anymore. They're just terrified of the silence. I think the biggest, most prevalent reason that, from my experience of talking to people, especially women, is that they stay for the kids. And that's an admirable reason to stay. I get it. Sometimes people stay for the children. Sometimes that's right. Sometimes children grow up learning that unhappy love is normal. it's very difficult, that choice of fear. And it's different for men and women. I think for men, it's the fear of maybe not seeing them, especially if one of the parents has stayed at home. And, you know, as we've all grown up with, most of the time, the female will get custody of the kids. And, a big drive for me when I broke up was that I did not want to be a weekend dad. I did not want to be like one of the soft play dads on a Sunday. I grew up without a father myself, and there was no way in hell that I was going to let that be the case for Zach. So that made me stay for probably 2 or 3 years longer than I should have done, because I was scared of not being involved in Zach's life, because I was thinking, oh God, what happens if his mum decides to move and Zach goes with her, and where does that leave me, and how am I going to see him? And we were still young, so if they meet someone else, does he then grow up thinking that guy is his dad, and is that guy going to teach him to tie his shoes and do his tie and all these things that you think that that's the role of the dad. So for men, that can be a real big drive just to stay in the relationship, from fear of not being the father that they want to be, of not seeing the kids. For women, I think it's the emotional fear of what that might do, what that looks like for your kids. Oh, it will destroy them. I don't want that. I don't want them growing up without two parents. I want them to see what a happy relationships looks like. Now, when you say that, if you want your children to see what a happy relationship looks like, you need to be happy in your relationship, and you need to still have a relationship. And I think we can make kids think that they know that we're happy, when kids aren't stupid. They do know. And as children, I think fundamentally we're selfish when we're kids, because that's the way we are. We haven't learned that empathy yet for other people so much. That hasn't necessarily developed. Our main concern is like, we're hungry, we'll eat. If we're not getting food, we'll cry. If, their world is about them. They want everything there that's for them. They want their mum there, they want their dad there. And I think the biggest thing that we do sometimes is we confuse our role as a parent with the relationship itself. Just because you split up, just because you go your own ways, if that's what happens, it doesn't stop you both being parents to your children, your child, whatever it may be. You can both still be the same parents. You just may not be doing it together. And if you looked at your relationship, you may not be doing that anyway, because in hectic lifestyles as they are now, one person might be there with the kids. Well, I'll have the kids because you have the kids because I'm going to do that, and I'll have the kids when you're doing that. And you might just be literally relay changing over the kids all the time, when they hand the kids to you and they're off, and then you hand the kids to them and then you're off, because you're doing all these other things as well. And especially parents that have got 2 or 3 children, they're going left, right, and centre. That's where a relationship can get lost as well, because one's taking Charlie to football and Veronica to dance and whatever it may be, and you're then going to pick another one up, and it gets so confusing sometimes that the relationship probably ended a long while ago. And it is possible to get that back, obviously, but that needs to be a conversation that you have. I always, I think, draw on that. What advice would I give to my son if he was in an unhappy relationship when he's older, and he sat down with me and just said, Dad, I'm just not happy? What advice would I give to him? Would my advice be, well, that's okay, son, stick with it, stay in there. You're there for the kids now. You've got to do, the father's role, or If it was, I had a daughter, your mother's role, you stay where you are. That's okay. It's okay that you're unhappy because you want your kids to be happy. What, who would give that advice? I'd love to hear from anyone that would give that advice to a kid. No, you stick with it. You stay with it. Because I don't think, I know I wouldn't. I want my son to be happy. I would want anyone's child. I think they would want them to be happy. And sometimes your happiness may be making someone else unhappy for a period of time. And I've been on that side of the fence as well. And you've got to respect eventually other people's opinions. So you can also feel that sunk cost tag. It's of, I've already spent 10 years in this, so I don't want to waste that. And I think that's the way you frame your relationship as well. I don't think any time in a relationship is lost. I think there's always good times in a relationship that you've shared. Obviously, tough times in relationships that you get through together. But I don't think because walking away from a 10, 15-year relationship is ever wasted. I think it's time that you've grown. You may have grown apart, you may have grown together, but you've shared something, especially if you've had children with someone. For those of us that have decided to leave relationships before, if and you've got children from those relationships, you would never change that. You never look back and think, well, that was a waste of 10 years, because you know that if you hadn't have done that, you wouldn't have the child that you had. They wouldn't look like that child, they wouldn't laugh like that child, they wouldn't act like that child. So that time is never wasted. And if you haven't had children from a relationship, I think the same thing applies, because you will have had great times in that relationship. It might have taken you 2, 3 years to make your decision that, that's not worked out for you. But again, you could have taken 2 years and it could have worked out for you, and you could have gone on to have a fantastic relationship. And then when you look back, that was just a path that you had to get through. So I don't think it's ever, time is never lost. That sunk cost tag that people, sometimes apply to relationships, I don't think is ever the case. It's time that you grew up, maybe apart, maybe together. And it can be an age fear. It can be, I'm late 30s. Who's going to want me? I'm mid 40s. Now, what am I going to do? And or I'm in my 50s. I think whatever age you are, you're still so much younger than you think. You've still got so much time left that you can meet people. And, people are coming in and out of relationships all the time, right the way through life. So you'll always meet people. If you'll meet the right person for you, then that's what you're taking a chance. And you can look at it like, I'm taking a real chance here. You're not. You wasn't happy. You can't stay if you're not happy. It's not fair on you. And it's definitely not fair on the person that you think you're staying for. It can be that, I've got to start all over again. I've got to go back to living in a 1-bedroom house or a 1-bedroom flat, or, whatever it may be. It could be the fear of dating again. It could be, God, I've listened to people talk about dating in midlife, and it sounds like, it sounds like hell. It sounds like really hard work. And what if I do all that and I regret it? Listen, if you leave something and you regret it, you can always try to go back to that. But if you are leaving something, you have to make sure that's what you want in the first place. You've got to make sure that the choice that you're making is right for you. You can only make that choice based on what you know now. You can't make a choice on what happens when you go forward, because, one, hindsight's a wonderful thing, obviously, but if you went back again, you'd make the same decision. You can only make the decision based upon what you know. And we never sit down and think, I'm going to make a stupid decision now, I'm going to leave. I don't think we do that. And you tend to look back on things depending upon the mood that you're in at the time. So when you're lonely and unhappy, you look back and you might miss things. But if you meet someone that's great, when you're in that, you won't think about, you think, well, this is great because that's why I left. I left to have experiences like that. So those fears can just be temporary. Regret can be a temporary state of where you are at that time, because where you were looks better than where you are now. But that doesn't mean that where you are now is permanent. That just might be a temporary place you're resting until you're ready to move on to the next thing. People can waste years because they're scared of wasting years. So the moment you know, if you speak to people that have come out of relationships, they'll always tell you that there was a moment that they can remember with such clarity. It feels like yesterday, when it's that love actually moment of enough now. That, that's enough now. I can't do this anymore. It can take time to get to that point that you know that you can't stick through it anymore. And I think sometimes until you get to that point, you will find it difficult to leave because you're probably toing and throwing. But once you get to that point where you just think, you know, I do know, and what can be signs for that is that there's an emotional disconnect with your partner in your relationship. You know that you only feel peace when they're not there, when they've left the room, and that noise of them, you know, moaning at you or you shouting at them sort of calms. And there's only a calmness when you're on your own, or you think, God, my routine's so much easier when I just do it on my own, when I've not got anyone else interfering in it or telling me that I'm doing it wrong, or reminding me of something that I know I've got to do anyway, but I know when I'm doing it, so stop reminding me to do it. That can be a sign that you're getting to that moment that and it could be that you don't see any future excitement. You don't sit there and look forward to things. You don't think, it's date night next week, that's great, I can't wait, just to be with them on their own, or we're going to have a weekend away together, you know just me and them without the kids, I can't wait. And also that you find relief instead of sadness in things. Relief once they leave after an argument, instead of like sadness that you might have upset them, and a relief that they phoned to say that they're working late, instead of like, oh, I was looking forward to seeing them tonight. You think, great, and even on my own, brilliant. Get the kids to bed early, have a glass of wine, and once that becomes a permanent thing that keeps reoccurring instead of a one-off thing, that's when you may not be in the right place for you. And sometimes the biggest red flag is relief. Ask yourself this: do you miss the relationship? Do you sit there and think, I miss what we had? Now, if you ask yourself that question and then you find that you do, you should be sitting down with your partner and saying, listen, we had something really good. It's not there at the moment, but I want it to be there. I want that back. If you sit down and just think, I'm done, I don't miss it. I don't miss what we had at all. And I don't want what we had back. I'm done with it. Then you know where you are. leaving doesn't make you the villain. No one wants to be the bad guy in a story. And we very seldom are honest with ourselves to actually give ourselves that role. So leaving someone, it doesn't make you the villain. And leaving doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean that you failed them or you failed your kids or you failed the relationship. You've given it a go, and if you've done all the right things and you've spoke to, had counselling, you've gone through that, or you've kept saying to them, listen, we need to change this, or I'm going to be done. If you've done all those things, it doesn't mean that you failed. And you choosing to have a peaceful life doesn't mean you're a bad person. You choosing your own happiness doesn't mean you're a bad person. And sometimes it's about honesty versus pretending. You owe it to the other person as well sometimes to be honest with them and to say, I don't love you anymore in the way that I should. And I want you to be loved by someone because you deserve that. And I'm not going to give it to you. And the worst thing that people do for their own sanity sometimes, because they know what they're missing in their lives, and they look to get it elsewhere because then they can cope in their relationship far better, is what they end up doing is almost having open relationships without the other person knowing. Because what they're doing is they're fulfilling all their need for feeling loved, feeling sexy, feeling that desire for someone, all those emotions that may have been missing in their relationship, but they don't want to leave the relationship. They end up maybe trying to find those in other places, and they become little affairs that they have that they're never leaving for. That they're never leaving their family and their wife, their husband, for those affairs. And the other person they're having the affair with might be in the same situation. So they think, right, all we're doing is keeping ourselves going to stay in those relationships because that's the best thing for everyone. But if you're the other person, you're basically in an open relationship without anyone telling you. So it's not fair on the person that you're with that you think you're doing the right thing. Give them the choice. Maybe sit down with them, and say, listen, I'm not getting this from you. How do you feel about an open relationship? Have that conversation. And I'm sure that would terrify the life out of people. It would me to have, that conversation. So then that gives you your answer, surely, that you're in the wrong place for you because you're not getting what you want. So sometimes staying is the selfish thing. Sometimes leaving is the kindest thing you can actually do, even though it's the hardest thing. You don't get one life for everyone else and another one for you. This is your life. And if you know deep down something is over, be brave enough to admit it. Because staying somewhere your soul has already left will destroy you slowly. Thank you for listening to 50 Shades of Grey. Thank you for following. Please make sure you subscribe and follow. It helps to keep us going. And give me your feedback on any of these episodes that we put out. That is not advice, and it's definitely not counselling. It's just a conversation. And I think sometimes they're the important things to help people are just conversations. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Bye.